the overseas territory of the United States have it much worse than Greenland has. We pay a lot more money to Greenland than the United States pay to their overseas territory. You can just go to American Samoa, U.S. Virgin Islands, or wherever, and you can see that it's not a blessing to become dominated by the United States. They don't even have voting rights. I mean, they have...
We do not seek to dominate anyone.
Oh, sure.
Not true.
And also the idea that China is taking over is completely absurd. China has no aspirations. The only threat to Greenland is the United States.
Reporting overnight tells us that American intelligence agencies have been given orders to step up their monitoring, their spying on Greenland. They have been told to keep track of Greenland's independence movement and public attitudes towards America moving in to extract natural resources. Now, what do we make of this? More importantly, right now, what does Carla Sands make of this? The former ambassador to Denmark for the United States during Donald Trump's first administration. Hello to you, Carla. Good to hear you again.
Hey, John, it's nice to be with you and all of your listeners.
Thanks for joining us, Carla. Now, Rasmus Jarlos is here too, who's chair of the Danish Parliament's Defence Committee. Hello to you, Rasmus.
Hello, how are you?
I'm well, Rasmus, and better for hearing you joining us for this conversation. Carla, can I start with you? So we get these reports, multiple now reliable reports, tell us that the American intelligence agencies have been given orders to get deeply involved in spying on Greenland, the territory of a friendly country, a fellow NATO partner. Are you completely comfortable with that, Carla?
You know, I just read it in the paper like you did, John. It's a surprise to me. But as a matter of fact, I wouldn't call it spying. I mean, Denmark and Greenland are great allies of the United States. I would just call it learning about Greenland, the Greenlandic people. They're wonderful, but a lot of Americans, including in the U.S. government, don't know much about Greenland.
Yeah.
So I think it's high time they learned.
Yeah. Well, you could learn quite a lot just by going to Greenland and talking to people or reading the Greenland newspapers. And when you get the Central Intelligence...
It's hard to read Greenlandic, John. Not many people read Greenlandic. About 50,000 people in the world.
Yeah, I've got enormous faith in the resources of the United States government. But when I see the Central Intelligence Agency and the National Security Agency and military intelligence all told to extract all the information they can on what people are saying and thinking about America and about the possibility of hooking up with America, becoming an American possession, it sounds like spying to me. It sounds like intelligence gathering. And I sort of feel, Carla, if that was my country, my island, and I was hearing that underway from a powerful country that I've always thought of as a friend, I'd feel a bit put upon. And you told me you were surprised about this just a second ago. Tell me why you were surprised then.
Well, I was surprised because I'm not in the government, and so I'm not aware of the intelligence gathering that the U.S. government is doing. But as a matter of fact, like I said earlier, it's high time that the American government and people, if they're interested, learn more about the wonderful people of Greenland.
Well, I'm all in favour of more, not less knowledge. Tell me, what are your thoughts, Rasmus, to what you've been hearing there from Carla and these reports?
I am very sure that the former American ambassador is not at all surprised, like she's saying. It's very, very clear what the Americans want. They want to dominate Greenland. They want to take their natural resources. They have no interest in the people of Greenland at all. What they want is to take control and rip the land of its resources. And the way to do that is not going to be a military invasion, because that would be too insane, even for the current American government. So now they will try instead to influence. They will try to delegitimize Denmark's presence in Greenland. So in the future, you will hear more and more stories being pushed about Greenland, and they will be false. You already heard many times the false story about how Russia and China are threatening Greenland, which is not true. They don't have any presence there. They don't have any mining, no consulate, no activities, nothing there. But still, the American government is pushing a story that they're almost about to take over Greenland. You will hear stories about how Denmark is mistreating the indigenous people in Greenland, which is pretty thick coming from a country with a history of indigenous people like the United States, considering that Greenland is the only country in the Americas where the indigenous people has been given their own country. And you will hear stories about how Denmark is not developing Greenland and how we are not extracting resources that could make the Greenlanders rich, which is also a false claim. So more and more of those stories will come out, and they will link up with the separatists because they see correctly that Denmark stands between the United States taking control of Greenland. So they want to get Denmark out. And then they will have formally, maybe in the future, the dream will be to have a formally independent Greenland that will be much easier to influence and ultimately to dominate.
Okay, so look,
so that's the way forward, and I think we can expect a lot of that in the future.
So Carla, you heard Rasmus there. He sees America's interest and involvement as something really rather sinister. What on earth can you say to reassure him?
Well, there's a couple of things. So first of all, Denmark has been trying to make the Greenlanders think that the U.S. is sinister. They've been doing a full court press, putting out polls from Danish universities, and they've actually passed a law in Greenland now that only Denmark basically can influence the people of Greenland. No other country or entity is allowed to influence their elections, only Denmark. Denmark has profited from Greenland for decades and for centuries. They actually make more from being, having Greenland be in the kingdom than they give them, around $600 million a year. All the flights, almost every one of them go through Denmark. All the shipping, almost all of it goes through Denmark. So they control that. They've benefited from the mining to the probably trillions, but certainly billions. And then, if you see what Denmark has done, and we love Denmark, but as a matter of fact, Denmark can't afford to defend Greenland and they can't afford to develop it, and they've never done so. They have a small population and a GDP around the state of the size of Colorado. So they don't have the ability to defend Greenland. And the tensions, in spite of what my friend is saying, he's incorrect. There is more Russian and Chinese activity in the Arctic today than there were generations ago. It's a much more dangerous world. President Trump looks at the world as it is, not as he wishes it was. The Greenlanders are going independent. And President Trump is not going to let this wonderful island with the beautiful natural resources be plundered by China, controlled by China. And that is the bottom line. Well, I don't speak for the administration, but this is common sense.
Yeah, there were those that would say that self-determination and sovereignty has to be the bottom line. I mean, the Greenlanders were asked, Carla, as you'll surely know, they were asked before the Greenland election, do you want to be possessed by America? 85% said no. And when the president was asked the other day, do you rule out military action to take Greenland? He says, I don't rule that out. Now, you didn't know, fair enough, you did not know about the intelligence operations that are being ordered, but you must have known about that. The president saying he doesn't rule out military action. You surely were shocked.
Well, President Trump is a master negotiator. I don't think we've ever had another U.S. president that's a better negotiator. He never takes anything off the table. He doesn't negotiate against himself.
Is that negotiation, Carla, to be fair? Is the threat of military action negotiation, or is that threats?
So John, here's what I'll say, that Greenland is going independent. It must be secure. We cannot allow it to fall into enemy hands. And to that point, we have other ways for Greenland to be part of America and be an absolutely independent country where they control their laws and they control everything about their country. Yes. It's called a COFA, or a free association. And we have examples of that. Other countries that are part of the U.S. in a way that lets them be completely independent, make their own rules and laws, control their sovereign borders, but U.S. companies invest in their countries, and the U.S. military defends their countries.
Rasmus Jarlov, what do you think?
Well, the ambassador is lying on so many accounts here. It's just incredible. I mean, the idea that Denmark the idea that Denmark should have a surplus on Greenland when we send about $800 million every year to Greenland as a direct subsidy and pay for a lot of other things. And then the idea that we somehow have a surplus out of that because they buy groceries in Denmark for a little part of that money is pretty absurd and has been debunked many, many, many times. And the overseas territory of the United States have it much worse than Greenland has. We pay a lot more money to Greenland than the United States pay to their overseas territory. You can just go to American Samoa, U.S. Virgin Islands, or wherever, and you can see that it's not a blessing to become dominated by the United States. They don't even have voting rights. I mean, they have.
We do not seek to dominate anyone.
Oh, sure.
Not true.
And also the idea that China is taking over is completely absurd. China has no aspirations. The only threat to Greenland is the United States. And the idea that only the United States can afford to develop Greenland is also pretty absurd. You have so much debt. The American citizenship, I don't know if you would even give that to the Greenlanders, but if you did, it comes with a starting price of a debt of 110,000 US dollars, whereas Denmark is one of the most prosperous countries in the world with the highest quality of living in the world. So we can very well afford to support Greenland as much as they want.
Okay, Carla.
John, I have to respond.
And we're not going to accept that Americans are lying and trying to delegitimize Denmark's presence.
I want to hear what Carla has to say about that. I mean, you probably know on this program we do like to pride ourselves on a civilized tone to our conversation. But Carla, Rasmus there with a good deal of passion says you are lying. He said it twice. So what do you say?
More than twice, I think, John, and that's very offensive. He knows that Denmark cannot afford to defend Greenland. He knows they've never bothered to develop it. Most of the infrastructure was built there by the U.S. military when we occupied Greenland during World War II and afterward until the end of the Cold War. They only financed and built 3 airports in Greenland because the U.S. government pushed them not to let China pull Greenland into their Belt and Road Initiative, which is what the CCP wanted. We want Greenland and Denmark, all of our allies, to do well, to be secure. But we will not, and I repeat, we will not allow a close-by nation fall into the hands of an adversary. Denmark has been very naive about the power of the CCP and their intentions in the Arctic. They wrote a paper in 2018 called The Polar Silk Road. They want to control 40% of the minerals and mining in the Arctic. They intend to be part of the governance, and they say they're a near Arctic nation. They're not. They're nowhere near the Arctic. So there's a lot of effort coming from China. Anne-Marie Brady wrote a great book called China as a Polar Great Power and Their Intentions in the Arctic and Antarctic. You're welcome to read it as a listener. It will tell you the story of China's intentions in the Arctic and the fact that Russia has the biggest military presence by far in the Arctic. Denmark has almost no military presence in the Arctic,
Carla,
in spite of having Greenland.
All right, before we move on, I was going to give you an opportunity to respond to the accusation of lying. I now have to give Rasmus a chance to respond to your suggestion that his language has been insulting. Insulting, Rasmus. What do you say?
I mean, insulting coming from someone who's actually trying to threaten us with military invasion, and then you think it's insulting that we call out your lies. We're going to continue to do that, and we're not going to just accept that Americans have these misinformation campaigns about how China is threatening everybody in the Arctic when it's totally not true. China has aspirations to get minerals, so does the United States. The difference here is the United States already has access. China doesn't, and China won't. Denmark has kept China out. Denmark has kept Russia out. And if we can continue to be an ally of the United States, we will continue to do that. We have done that very well and very effectively. So there is no Chinese presence in Greenland. There's a Chinese restaurant in the capital, Nuuk. That's the closest thing you have to a Chinese presence in Greenland. So it's simply not true, this picture. And it's the oldest trick in the book that you paint this fake threat from other powers so you yourself can go in and be the protector and then threaten with military invasion. It really reminds us of very, very bad excuses used by other powers throughout history. So this is very, very bad. And it's very bad for the Western Alliance.
I do have to leave it there. I mean, you both had a go at this with a certain amount of very obvious and audible passion. And I sort of feel that our listeners get a good handle of the argument, listening to the both of you having it out in the way that you have. Carla Sands and Rasmus Jarlov, thank you so much.